Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Zhang and I'm the founder and host of Empathy Gaps, an online YouTube video podcast. In today's episode, episode 2, I will be speaking with Jeff Hancock, a Stanford professor of communications, as well as the Stanford Social Media Lab founder and director. Reading Caitlin Tiffany's article, No One Knows Exactly What Social Media is Doing to Teens, in The Atlantic, I became intrigued with why there were so many conflicting results on the studies of social media and teen mental health. According to the article, there is a clear correlation between worsening teen mental health and social media, but not exactly a clear causation. The article also dives into many different research viewpoints, including Jeff Hancock's. After reading the article, I knew that I had to interview him. In this interview, I will be discussing with Jeff Hancock about the future of social media, the AI Bill of Rights passed by the White House, tech regulation, and how misinformation, disinformation, AI, and social media will play a role in the 2024 election. Here is my conversation with him. Hi everyone, and welcome to Empathy Gaps, an online video podcast focused on creating a safe space to discuss mental health while also working to address the needs of the current mental health crisis. I'm Tiffany Zhang, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Professor Jeff Hancock. Professor Hancock is a professor in the Department of Communications at Stanford University and the founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab, where he and his group study social media's effects on psychological and interpersonal processes. Professor Hancock, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything else that you want to add regarding to what you do and who you are?
No, it's just a real pleasure to be here and having a conversation with you.
Okay, great. So basically, I'm going to jump right in with a few questions and then we'll kind of see how it goes from there. So I guess my first question is to kind of establish some background information. Can you please talk about your journey from being a customs officer to a professor at Stanford?
Yeah, it was one of those ones where I thought I knew how deception worked, and when you're a customs officer, you actually have to deal with deception, and that really surprised me and made me want to kind of study things more and understand how deception and trust work and how technology might be affecting those. Mm-hmm. And so then I started my PhD and been working on it ever since.
Oh, that's so interesting. Speaking of, I guess, like change, journey, and transitions, can you talk a little bit about the trend of social media research and how it has shifted from when you first started to what it is currently?
Wow, great question. When I started, it was really all about text messaging. So people interacting in chat rooms, and SMS hadn't even really started yet then. And people were really wondering, well, how can people communicate when it's just via text? Like, that's going to be a problem. And so we did a lot of work on how did that change the way people spoke to each other? How did it change the way we understood or maybe perceived someone else? And then I started the social media lab at Cornell, and boom, after that, actual social media started to come around. So, the development of Facebook and all the others. And so then it just exploded, and this interest in how we communicate and relate to one another has just become exponentially more studied. We look at well-being studies. The first one was in 2006. And that was asking, well, how does social media affect your well-being? And now there's well over, 200 or 300 of those studies done a year. So it's pretty crazy how much the interest has changed over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think social media itself has definitely grown very rapidly. Like, I remember, I wasn't born during this age, but Facebook used to be like a super big thing, but now it's Instagram and TikTok and all this short form content. And I feel like also 3 to 5 years ago, they're also very, maybe 3 to 5 years ago, there were very conflicting studies over if social media was truly harmful, I guess. And I feel like that there's a lot of conflicting results, like even now. So I guess my question is, why do you think that there are so many conflicting results on these studies?
Well, that's the $1 billion big policy question right now, I think, Tiffany. And when I look at the research, one reason there's conflicting results is that we use social media to do lots of different things. If we do use it in ways that are about doing things that make us feel good about ourselves, like connecting with each other or expressing ourselves, then that's going to have a good outcome for me. If I use it in a way that is mean or trolling, or I'm doing things that are going to make me anxious, like, stalking someone or political news, that'll make me feel bad. And so because there's lots. A second reason is the relationship between social media and well-being seems to change a lot for different people. Some people it doesn't matter relative to other healthy habits like eating or their diet or their exercise or their friendships. But for some it matters a lot. It can be really bad. They feel bad about themselves when they use it. And for yet others, it could be really important, like they need it to connect with people or to express themselves in ways they can't do face-to-face. So there's just like a lot of variability across people, but also in how one person might use it compared to another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in also some studies, like I feel like social media has a very wide definition. Like most studies consider social media as user-generated content, but YouTube fits in this criteria, but it's like not really evaluated. So I guess that's also like kind of why there are so many conflicting results. So I guess my next question would be like, how can this research be more conclusive?
Well, that is really an important thing that we're all working towards. I think two things are probably needed. One is new kinds of studies, or not new kinds, but more studies that do experiment relationship between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So these, experiments, longitudinal studies. And then another is theory. So right now there is no one theory or idea about how social media and well-being are related. There's all kinds of possible mechanisms. It could be social comparison. It could be connection. It could be displacement. So there's lots of these different things. And so we don't really have a good sort of set of theories about it yet either. So I think both of those are going to be needed for us to move forward. And I guess the last one is measurement. Right? Like right now we ask people, how much time were you on social media yesterday, Tiffany? And you say a number. And that's really weird and problematic in a couple of ways. One is you're probably not going to remember very well how much time you're actually on it. And there's lots of evidence showing that. But the other is time is not the most important thing. If you're doing something that's really, like I said, positive and you're interacting with friends, that's probably good. If you're just watching, TikToks for a little while, it's probably neutral, fine. And if someone's being really mean to you and you're getting bullied, that's really bad. And it can take the same amount of time for all those things. So that's another thing is like measuring the real diversity of what people do on social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I've also seen articles saying that like if you want research to be more conclusive, you should focus on like a specific population, like teenage girls who use Instagram heavily. Like I think that's a very like specific population. But also I feel like there are some ethical hoops to be jumped through if you want a good study, because first of all, like to establish causation, I like learned this in my AP stats class, like to establish causation you need to like randomly choose from the population and randomly assign, which I feel like some people might not want to like be involved in this experiment. So I feel like there's definitely like a long way to go until there can be definitive evidence saying like yes, social media is harmful, or like no, social media isn't harmful. So I think those are just some things to consider. But also like for people who genuinely do have a problematic relationship with social media, I know you had this study about like changing mindsets. Like can you talk a little bit more about how changing their mindset can help?
Yeah, this is research led by one of our PhD students here, Angela Lee, and it's called Her Idea. And the idea there is that we have mindsets about all kinds of things, and they sort of help us understand the world and our relationship to it. So famous one is growth mindsets. If you think, that intelligence is like a muscle, you work hard, you practice, you can improve. And if you think it's like you're a fixed amount of intelligence you're given at birth, then you avoid practice, you avoid tests. and it's not as good for learning. And so a mindset can be really important. Mindsets for social media are really around, do you feel like you're in control of social media, that you're using it to do things you want to do, or do you feel like it controls you? Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's a really, really important distinction. We call it agency. People that have high agency, they feel like they are in control. They tend to have higher well-being after they use social media than people that feel like they're out of control, they're addicted and things like that. And so we think that the mindset people have is really important. It's one reason I worry about the general narrative of like kids your age, you know, Tiffany, you're all terrible because you use social media, you're all addicted, mm-hmm. and it's making you bad. And I hate that because it's telling you that when you use these devices, when you use the social media, that it's bad for you and that you can't help it. In fact, you can't. We adults are making you use social media, these tools in school and for your soccer and, you know, all kind, you know, and staying in touch with friends. And so I worry that we are telling a generation of people that this thing is bad for them, and at the same time setting up the world where we make them use it. So I'd much rather help young people think about what their use is and help them develop more control and more of that sense of agency over social media. And that way we'll be less like, oh God, I just spent like 2 hours and I only meant to spend 2 minutes. And, you know, recognizing like that we're trying to do stuff with these technologies rather than they're doing things to us.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's like you who said this or maybe like someone else. I've heard people say like social media is like a tool, like you control the tool, like the tool doesn't control you. And I don't know if you were the one that said that, I don't know. But like I've also heard of this study called, I don't know if you've heard of it before, it's called like Project Awesome from the University of Amsterdam. And I think its findings were similar in that like the researchers found that the mood you are in while using social media is more influential than the time spent. So
yeah, we would, yes, there's a great group over there doing that work. We feel really similarly to them on several things. And yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It is a lot like a tool, and we have to be careful. So I'm a psychologist, and psychologists really think about them like how a person is engaging with their own behavior. So from a psychological point of view, I do think thinking of it as a tool is a really valuable and powerful way to do it. The limitation of that view that I've kind of come to realize, it's an important limitation of my own thinking and work, is that second part I said to you, which is that we're setting the world up in certain ways, right? And so we set a world up in which people kind of need to use these tools and these technologies to live their lives. And, you know, if you say, Tiffany, were like, well, you know what, I'm not going to use it, then, which would be, you know, a way of having lots of agency and saying, okay, I'm choosing not to use this, you'd probably miss out on some important things. You'd miss out on stuff going on with your friends. You might miss out with school stuff. You'd miss out on like what's going on with Taylor Swift's latest, you know, concert, right? Like there's costs if we don't use it that aren't about the individual. They're about sort of the society and ways to set that up. So from a psychological point of view, I think we should think of them as tools, as people that are part of society and citizens in society. We should be thinking like, okay, is this how we want to set up the world? Do we want to have these being, you know, for profit, or do we want regulation? And so I think there's lots of questions above the tool level. So I just want to be careful that we don't just think tool, because that makes it a little too overly simplistic and almost a little too easy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I guess like my next question would be like, why do you think that there's this narrative that social media is addictive?
Yeah, there's a bunch. One, you know, maybe the most important is there's, you know, pretty serious dramatic change taking place in society, especially around kids, but everybody. When there's change like that, when new technologies come around, we often run into this kind of panic where people are like, oh my God, like, what are we doing here? This is Is this good? Is this bad? It seems like a big change. That's probably bad. And we've seen that with every major innovation, from newspapers to radio to TV to video games to internet, and, social media. And it's important questions. We don't want people being addicted. We don't want people to be, out of control or harmed. And so I think asking the question and having some worry about it is a good thing. Another reason is, if you talk to any parent and any kid, one of the main sources of conflict these days is like how much time kids and parents spend on their phones and spend on media. I mean, it is really a lot of time, even if you're not using social media, but you're just watching, say, YouTube, or you're, reading on your Kindle, or, whatever. That's a big issue. And so a lot of times parents and kids have these fights. And so there's a lot of worry about, like, oh my gosh, I'm fighting with my kid about this thing. And therefore they must, they know I want them using less, and therefore they must be addicted. They can't help themselves. Now, of course, we also hear from a lot of kids that they think their parents are also addicted. That doesn't get talked about quite as much. But so that's the second reason. And the third is something we know about the news. A study that shows that something's harmful to you is going to get lots of attention. And a study that shows that something's not harmful, no one's going to care about it. It's not because of the science per se, but the way that we have news in our world, which is more people pay more attention to negative things. And so, the media tends to, focus on those because that gets more attention. So it's why there's very few good stories in the news, and usually, bad stories. So I think those three are pretty big reasons. And as I said, it's important that we ask these really good questions and hard questions as kids are using them more and more. But I do worry that the narrative has become kind of dominant and doesn't reflect the really varied findings that we see in the field.
Mm-hmm. And also, what you said about how social media is kind of new, so people are, I guess, more freaked out about it. How does that, I guess, relate to the rise of AI? Because I feel like a lot of people, or some people I know, they're also super freaked about AI and just you know what I mean? So how does that kind of relate to AI?
Yeah, well, AI is sort of the next huge change. People are freaking out. There's lots of questions about it. I personally, we've been working on how AI sits in communication, how it sits between people that are talking to each other for 7 or 8 years now. I remain pretty excited about it. There's lots of ways in which this will help people become, better, more effective, more ethical, potentially, from, mental health to marketing to, you name it. I worry also that when you think about deception, that it could be used in deceptive and manipulative ways. So right now in 2023, I can be pretty confident that you're actually Tiffany, and it's actually your voice, and these are actually your words and questions. Mm-hmm. But not very long from now, that won't be a guarantee. And AI could be being used by you or by me to sound smarter, sound more persuasive, be tailored for our specific conversation, and it won't be just text. It will be audio, and even if we were on Zoom, it could be video too. So I'm a little curious and a little nervous about AI's effect on trust, at least in the short term. But I think, with most things, I believe in people, and I think we will adapt and find this new tool to be yet another new thing we can use to become more creative, more helpful, as well as more problematic. All these tools can be used for good and bad. Fire can warm you up when you're cold, and it can burn down your house. And I think the same thing is possible for all these kinds of tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think this kind of serves as a pivot to my next question, but
In 2020, I think October 2022, the Biden administration recently released the blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. I guess, like, what are your thoughts on this?
Right. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that as well, because, as I talk to companies that are thinking about deploying AI as part of their service or product, how do we do this in ethical ways? And so the blueprint that they laid out, I think, was really good. It related in some ways to what the UN had also done around this, and I think the idea of emphasizing sort of safety, being aware of and eliminating discrimination and understanding where that comes from, those are all important. Here at Stanford, we think that it should be used to augment humans rather than replace them. And some of their Bill of Rights had some aspects on that. So I thought overall it was a really good start, and we have to keep on working on it since it's so new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I guess, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the Bill of Rights doesn't carry like the weight of the law. But yeah, it definitely still is like a big step though, and I feel like part of it is that AI is like really new and we're still trying to find answers ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, that's right. And it'll be hard for the U.S. to do anything around developing AI law, but we see the Europeans are already doing that, so maybe we have to follow their lead.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my next question is, like, what do you think our future relationship with social media, AI, and technology will look like in the future? Like, do you see it ever changing?
Sorry, do I see what changing?
Like, our current relationship with social media, AI, and technology changing?
Oh, yes, definitely. One of my favorite sort of biases was laid out by Dan Gilbert at Harvard. And he calls it presentism bias, that the way things are now or the way we imagine they will always be. We have a really hard time imagining the future, despite being really amazing at imagining things, but we really have a hard time imagining a future that's different from what we have now. And if you were to ask people, in say the 30s or 40s, what life would look like now, it'd be very, very different. And even if you ask people, say in 2000, what it would look like now, it'd be very, very different. So, yeah, I think we definitely will change. We will, adapt and start to incorporate these in different parts of our lives. And I see a lot of change. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think like 5 years ago, I probably could have like never imagined like ChatGPT or like other AI, but I feel like now I'd argue and say that it's like a prevalent part of our lives. But I feel like, as you said, it's hard to know what will happen, especially if it'll have a positive or negative impact, because I feel like it has a possibility to spiral a lot in either way.
Mm-hmm.
Because on one hand, it's like really possible that, I guess, like deep fakes and like misinformation could spiral like really out of control, but like on the other hand, like technological innovation could have the serious potential to like improve and impact your lives for the better.
Yeah, I think of it the same way, to me. Like, you can imagine misinformation getting a lot more worse, that people that are misinformation purveyors sort of flood the zone, and overwhelm us with misinformation. But that probably wouldn't serve their goals, which are usually to make money or to persuade people. So if they flood it so much that nobody believes anything and no one buys anything, then that doesn't fit their goals. So I think there's still some constraints there. On the flip side, you've mentioned the mental, health issues, especially young people are facing. Your whole focus on empathy, which is so great, recognizes that there's a huge need for more mental health care in the U.S., but also around the world. And it's really hard to train up a therapist, a psychiatrist, a counselor. It takes years. And so you could also imagine AI playing a really important role in providing more access to more people that don't have it or are unlikely to. Just the same as with misinformation, and there's constraints there too. Lots of ways in which it could be done unethically, where we're getting people to have relationships with machines. I don't think anybody thinks that's what we want. But there's ways that it could be done where, it'll help make any interaction that a therapist or a counselor or a coach has with somebody be that more efficient, that more effective. And so I think you're right. Like, there's lots of things that we should be keeping our eyes on, and lots of things to be hopeful about.
Yeah, pivoting from like misinformation to disinformation, I know that President Obama spoke at Stanford about disinformation and its threat to democracy, and he also said that regulation has to be a part of the solution in reining in big tech. How do you feel about current regulation?
Well, despite being the co-director of the Cyber Policy Center, I'm still working out, my positions around policy. I'm working with a really great group here from, law, CS, psych, comm, sociology, where we're really thinking about social media and AI and what we think the policy implications are. And so, when that comes out, we have a couple papers that we're working on. I'll send that to you. But as of right now, I think it's pretty problematic in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of moving from the federal to the states, and all the states are trying to come up with different laws, and that's going to make it really messy.
Mm-hmm.
And so no, I think that the current policy landscape is really problematic, and I don't see super easy solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially like when you look at, I guess, like European nations, like I think they're more ahead of regulation than the US is. So, but hopefully in the future we'll have good, like better regulation.
Right. Let's hope. I mean, there's a lot of people thinking about it right now, and hopefully they can have an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I guess one of my last questions is what is the Stanford Social Media Lab's next area of focus / research?
Right, good question. And right now we've got 3 areas that we work on, and all of them are really exciting and topical, and we're really pleased that we're able to do work that's at the center of a lot of social debate right now. So social media well-being, which we've been talking about, AI and communication, which we've also been talking about, and then the last is misinformation and trust, which we've been talking a little bit about. And there we're trying to develop new literacy techniques to help people become a little bit better at sort of saying, yeah, that's real news, and no, that's not, I can ignore that. Trying to help seniors, we're trying to help young people, adolescents, we're trying to help diverse communities that tend to be underserved, but get targeted a lot by misinformation. Mm-hmm. So that's a big area that we're working on. And I think we continue to work on those 3 big things, and there's so many new things happening each of them that I think that's definitely the 3 sweet spots for sure.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And I guess speaking on misinformation, I'm really glad that y'all are doing kind of targeted research on misinformation, because I am pretty sure that misinformation is it gains more attention than real news or real facts. Why do you think that is?
Well, it relates to our social media well-being narrative, right? It's much more interesting and scary and therefore newsworthy if misinformation is everywhere. Misinformation is destroying democracy. Misinformation is ruining kids. You can't trust anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really bad, because most people, most of the time, they don't encounter very much misinformation. It's less than 1% on all the studies that we've looked at, and the ones that we've conducted. And so what that means is we're making people suspicious about a very small part of their media diet. That's good. Much less likely to get tricked by a scammer or by misinformation. But it also means that they're much less trusting of actual news, real news, and less likely to be able to say, okay, I can say that's true. So it's worrisome, and we have to, do better and stop trying to just say misinformation. That'd be really good.
Mm-hmm. And what role do you think that lying, social media, AI, disinformation, misinformation, like all the things we were talking about, will play in the 2024 election?
All of them will be at play. The good thing is that we know a lot of the threats that are in place, and those ones we tend to do really well at protecting against: the government, law enforcement, platforms, people, right? So there's actually fewer people were exposed to misinformation in the 2020 election than in 2016 because we knew about it more and we were educating people. But then there's new issues that we're less aware of, like how will deepfakes work in 2024?
Yeah.
How do we establish, what's a real news video versus what's made up? And so there's going to be some, as always, new things. But I'm confident that we'll be on top of a number of the big issues. And I also think like undermining, faith in voting and things like that is really problematic. So I hope that sort of stops. That'll be important so that people believe, what's going on.
Yeah, I think I really like your optimism and like all your very optimistic attitude. I feel like some people are, I guess, like less optimistic, but yeah.
Yes, many people are less optimistic. It could be my my Canadianness, but I'm still feeling hopeful and optimistic for humans.
Yeah. So I feel like we had a very interesting conversation today. Thank you everyone thank you, Professor, for coming on and speaking with me, and thank you to everyone at home watching. Thank you so much, and I will see everyone next time.